Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD. If you want to follow me on Twitter. And it's Tuesday, August 6th. We'll be taking a look at the 11-game, most likely, almost definitely, 10-game MLB slate tonight on DraftKings. So hit that thumbs up button on your way in the door. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Hit the notification bell to always know when we go live. Remember, 5 p.m. Eastern, Grinders Live. They'll give you a little bit more detailed look at tonight's slate. This is more of a first look at 11 o'clock in the morning. And following Grinders Live is crunch time. 6:15, 6:20 or so on the same stream. Kevin Roth will come on for a last-minute look. Some weather radar stuff. We're gonna need it. We actually may not need it. It may be. I think the Yankees-Angels game actually gets postponed before then, but we'll see. You never know. So check us out then. Join with me this morning on a busy MLB day. It's Will Priester, Chief Justice, the proprietor of Chiefs Prop Shop in our Discord. You could join that, rotogrinders.com/Discord. And Will, for the purposes of this first look, I'm just going under the assumption that the Yankees-Angels game is not going to play. If we take a look at Roth's weather report, he puts it at orange, but his description is basically, this may get upgraded to red. Could get postponed early. And this game being postponed may actually be a decent deal because there's not much offense on today's slate. There's a lot of good pitching, except for like one or two spots, and the Yankees are one of those spots, and you take them off the slate. I think the other New York team that's in Colorado is going to be pretty damn chalky. So let's play the slate out as if the Yankee game is not playing.
Yeah, and I don't think it is. I mean, like you said, even if you looked at Ross, and I know you have, you looked at his report this morning. I mean, his first words were yuck, automatic orange. He thinks it could be PPD'd early. He doesn't see a way for them to really get this game in. Like, he's not calling it off like hard stopping it. But basically he's saying, look, rain at the beginning of this game, rain in the middle of this game, rain at the end of this game. How do they get it in? Probably don't get it in. So, yeah, I mean, he said he could upgrade it to red before the day is out. So if it goes to red, I mean, that's pretty much auto PPD in his book, I think.
Right. But we do got a lot of good pitching on today's slate.
Oh, yeah, tons of it.
And because of that, the offensive output is going to be low. I mean, we see tons of totals that are under 4 implied team totals in most of these games. I mean, outside
in
of
one game, we got 2 teams under 4.
Yes, we'll talk about that. But I mean, not many. I mean, 4.5 is like a lot. And then we, of course, have the Mets with over a 6 implied run total in Coors against Kyle Freeland. We'll talk about stacks at the end.
Yeah.
But to me, it seems like a slate with a lot of pitching that I may do like the opposite of what I would normally, the macro thing is that it's a 10-game slate. The Mets are going to be super chalked, and rightfully so. That stack projects like 7 points higher than like anyone else on the slate, and like 13 points higher than like the middle of the pack.
And on a 10-game slate, that's a lot of points. Like on a 5-game slate,
lot.
Like that's marginal. But on a huge slate, I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
I get the sense that maybe I just play the Mets Rockies game tonight, and then it feels as if more than half. I mean, it feels like half the pitchers are viable. Some are more so than others. There's some price discrepancies, but I mean, I feel comfortable with like a lot of pitchers on this slate. And let's start off with that. Let's talk about that Twins Cubs game. Okay, because we can take a look at the weather report also for that, and some light drizzle. So it's green. Don't worry, the game's going to play. The winds are ripping in from left center at 20 miles an hour. The total in this game is 6.5, which is low for baseball. The bat has the Cubs and the Twins as the lowest projected stacks on the entire slate. because of that. And then we got two pitchers there. We got Pablo Lopez at 8K and Shota Imanaga at 9,500. I mean, outside of pricing, because 9,500 is one of the more expensive pitchers on the slate. But Pablo Lopez at 8K, Luis Castillo at 8,200 against Detroit. These guys both have 6.5 strikeout props. Detroit has like a 3-point-nothing implied total. I mean, with these projections, they projected the bat. You can see on the screen 22 as a mean, which is very, very good for 8K. And playing two 8K pitchers at 16.2K, you could play. The Mets are not expensive. I mean, they're not cheap, but for the run total that they have in cores, the stack is affordable. You throw Tyrone Taylor in there at 3K. Playing 16K for pitchers is not going to be an issue. Can you give me a reason why Lopez, Castillo, and then Imanaga at 9,500 are outside of you want to play other people because we still have other good pitchers on the slate? Do you see do you see any warts on any of these any of these pitchers?
No, not today. And once again, and I'll kind of break it down like this. In this out of that group, Imanaga, Lopez, Castillo, and Imanaga, Lopez, Castillo. Who's your other one?
No, that's it. I mean, maybe you
those
could,
three.
maybe
Okay,
throw,
those three.
Maybe you could throw. Can you throw Sonny Gray at 9,600 against Tampa Bay in that? Yes, you can at 9,600.
Yeah, let's do it. So let's talk about it.
I think that's the top batch of pitchers today.
Yeah, so let's talk through that. And Blender, this is an interesting one because right now Gray and Imanaga are carrying some pretty hefty ownership, along with Pablo Lopez, and then along with Luis Castillo, which I anticipated this last night with Castillo and Lopez being 8K and 8,200 respectively. So let's talk through. And I know I'm going to start with that Cubs. The Cubs Twins game because they've got the biggest weather impact. This is a spot where I'm going to eat the chalk on Pablo Lopez, Blender, because of the salary. It just opens up for you to be able to, in a sense, do anything you want. I feel like in the hitting category. So even though Pablo Lopez is at 3,700, that's chalk I'm willing to eat because of the situation. If he was facing the Yankees today and he was picking up 37% ownership, if the Yankees game was going to play and he was in Yankee Stadium, I would probably be close to getting to a fade here because there's so many other pitchers. But the situation, there's strikeouts in the Cubs lineup. I'm perfectly fine with Lopez. Castillo, on the other hand, is an interesting one for me because I think we're playing Castillo more for the matchup, not necessarily what he's done in the strikeout department for the season. So I think what we're saying is the long-term skills of Castillo should be able to put him squarely in play for tournaments because of the matchup he has against the Detroit Tigers today. And I tend to agree with that. At 35%, I like it. I don't love it. Let me say that. I like it. I don't love it on Castillo. If I've got to choose, believe it or not, between Imanaga and Gray today, Blender, I'm actually taking Gray because, once again, Sonny Gray, hear me out, and I know the projection is 2 points lower in the bat.
But there's a reason for that. Will. Sonny Gray, I'm going to sort of make your case for you, but make it not for you. Sonny Gray has the highest strikeout prop on the slate today, right? He has the 6.5 minus 134, which is a little bit better than Castillo, Lopez.
Up to minus 144 some places now.
Oh, okay, depending on where you look. The downside to Sonny Gray, is that, he's probably doesn't pitch 100 pitches, right? I mean, he's someone that typically is in that 85 to 90 range. So it's a good strikeout matchup against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has already offloaded some of their. Tampa Bay has given up essentially.
This is where I'm headed, Blender.
Okay,
this is where I was headed. Yeah, this is where I was headed. So when I looked at Tampa Bay this morning, Blender, 8 of their 9 bats are above a 20% K rate. 8 of the 9. That excludes Yandy Diaz, who's their leadoff bet, who's never been a high strikeout guy. Never. So you just throw him out. Everybody's above 20. 5 of those 8 are above 25%. So my reason is because he has the best strikeout matchup on the board, the $100 difference is enough for me to play him over Imanaga today. If I had to choose between the two, I'm playing all 4 of these guys. Don't worry. But I do think Gray, despite the 2 fantasy point projection, I do think he's a better player. I think he's got way more strikeout upside. Like, I personally think, Blender, this could be an 8 to 10 strikeout game for him. So that's where I am. And so if you're on, for those of you that are into laddering strikeout props, I do think today would be a great day to ladder Sonny Gray if you so choose. If you don't know what a ladder is, you just, kind of break up your units, play, higher units on the normal prop, slightly lower units on the next one up, which would be 7.5, slightly lower on the 8.5, slightly lower on the 9.5 from each level up. So you can kind of cover yourself there. But that's my reason for taking Gray over Imanaga, is because of the strikeout upside.
I also want to highlight something that I always point out. I'm a broken record when it comes to get the best price, get the best number. If you're going to do strikeout ladders, which means, over 6.5, over 7.5, over 8.5, over 9.5, get the best prices. And it's actually rare that all of them are going to be at the same book.
Right.
A lot of times the place that you get the over 6.5, maybe one place, and then the over 7.5, will be at another place, and then the over 8.5 and the over 9.5 will be at another place, right?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes these discrepancies can be large enough, especially on the higher end. I mean, I've done these things before where, the over 9.5, which is one book has it at plus 850, but another book may have it at plus 1,400. So that's a big enough gap that, especially on those higher end stuff, if 10.5, maybe plus 2,200 one place, but only plus 1,300 another place. It's worth it to have multiple sports books open and just make sure you're getting the best price. Don't just go to one book and go, well, if they have the best line on the main prop line, that they probably have the best line on the secondary derivative ones. It's actually rarely the case. It's actually most of the time you're going to find it differently.
And let me plug this in, because I know we got to finish up this DFS stuff. And I know we always kind of get, for some reason, we end up on these type of topics on the show, me and you, and I always love it because this is just our thing. But that's the difference, even in a day. So now we're not talking about the month or the year. We're talking about in a day. That's the difference between hundreds. The difference between plus 1,300 and plus 2,400. That's, if you're at $10, that's $90. If you're at 100, that's $900. That's a huge difference, and that's just one leg, Blender. So as you walk it back, the difference between plus 600 and plus 800. That's enough, and I'm using it in hundreds right now. But whatever level you're on, that's so. If you ladder this up and you get it right. So here's the thing: but the day that you get it right, imagine if you got them all right. You laddered it up to 9.5, 10.5. 9.5. I'll cut it off at 9.5. You got the 6.5, you got 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, and you took worse odds, all at the same sports book, instead of you talked about splitting it up. Blender, that's probably over $1,000, depending on how you've broken this down.
Right.
Depending on
where your level is. And all you had to do was just log on to the other sports book and just bet it there. I mean, just go. It's online. You don't have to walk anywhere. Just open it up. Right. It's easy.
Fantastic point.
Okay. So we got Gray, we got Imanaga, we got Lopez, we got Castillo. Maybe we could throw Framber Valdez in there a little bit, 8,400 against Texas. I think he's okay. I mean, the case that I'll always make for guys like Lopez, Castillo, Imanaga, Valdez is that, these guys can pitch 100 pitches and Gray doesn't. But like you said, Gray look, we saw yesterday with David Festa. He struck out like 9 batters in 5 innings. So, like, efficiency does happen. But outside of these guys, I still think there are playable pitchers. I think Tyler Mahle on the other side of that game against Houston is a large field viability. I think Grayson Rodriguez against Toronto, 8,500 is playable, I guess. Chris Bassett against Baltimore on the other side of the game at 7,000. I'm not even sure if you need to use these guys, though. Like, the thing is
I don't think you do.
The question comes in is that, like, let's on DraftKings, you're playing 2 pitchers. So you go, it's like, okay, I'm going to play Pablo Lopez. He's going to be 35% owned. Tyler Mahle, 7,600, and he's going to be like 4% owned. But he's 7,600. It's like, why not just play Luis Castillo? Like, Luis Castillo projects for like 6 points higher, 8 points higher for only 600 more. And that 600 that you're saving, where you really, I mean, maybe you get a slightly better bat in one of the other spots, but for the most part,
it's not worth it though. That 600 isn't worth it. It's not worth it.
I just think I just think that there are some stacks here that you're not going to really be able to get to well. You maybe get the bottom of the order type of stuff. If you go something like Imanaga Gray, you know, like if you're paying like that, like the 9K, 2 9K pitchers, or even if you're doing like Gray Castillo, Gray Rodriguez, you may get into, you know, a little bit of trouble. I mean, there's still stacks to play. Dude, you can play. Yeah. You're probably not playing the main Mets if you're playing the Mets stack. If you're doing stuff like that. But outside of that, I mean, I still think if you wanted to take a shot at Kiter Montero at 5,400 against Seattle, that's a great strikeout matchup against Seattle. He has a 5.5 strikeout prop, and he's 5,400. Ross Stripling against, I mean, any pitcher against the White Sox is fine.
I can't do Ross Stripling though. I can't do it.
Yeah, I'd rather take a shot on Montero.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't do Ross. Like, he's like, Ross is a rough pitcher, man. Like, and back in the day, I mean, I would play him, you know, because he had a leash. He could get through some innings and kind of not get blown up too much, Blender, to like mess up his fantasy production. But right now, he's just bottom of the barrel pitching. Let me pitch this to you, Blender, while we're talking about pitching. Now, I think I mentioned this last night on the morning grind. I think I did. In my mind, I haven't pulled up SimLabs yet. I am going to do that like after the show.
Right.
In my mind,
well, just to be clear for the watchers, the Yankee games is still in SimLabs, so
right.
Make sure you want to kind of check SimLabs out closer to lock, more so than not.
Blender. Thus, I haven't looked at it yet. Right. I already, you know, I haven't looked. But what I will say is, and this is more about the pitching, I gotta think the chalk combination, and obviously this is obvious, but I want to just make sure everybody understands the chalk combination is Lopez Castillo today. So at pitching, if you're doing anything different than that, like if you decide I'm going to play Gray Imanaga, you have to know that you may be able to get away with some weird combination of bottom of the Mets order, because it's not going to, like, you're not going to be nearly as chalky as, because not everybody, I think most will understand Lopez and Castillo are like the point per dollar plays at pitcher. So if you plug both of those in and you play the Mets, you're not different. And that's the point I'm trying. You're not going to be different. So I think splitting them up, and I don't like Framber Valdez, but I'm saying a slight pivot to a Framber Valdez in a couple lineups, like that could be the difference between, you know, a top 3 finish, Blender, and a top 20 finish, because of the ownership gap and possible fantasy point gap also if Framber happens to outperform Castillo or Lopez today. So just wanted to bring that up. I know that's like simple, that's straightforward, but I do think it's important when you've got 2 pitchers on what's going to probably be a 10-game slate, both of them plus 35% ownership. That's a big deal to me on a large slate.
So let's get the stacks. We got the Mets. Okay, the Mets are the highest projected stack by far I mean, by far enough that, like, the Mets, from a projection standpoint, it's like against the teams just below them, it's like having an extra batter in their lineup. And in the middle of the pack, it's like having 2 extra batters in their lineup. So that's how big of a gap the Mets are projection-wise, at least in the back, but in most projection models with their implied run total. They're going to be the most owned stack. But remember, chalk, there's no such thing as bad chalk, good chalk. There's nothing like that. It's over-owned and under-owned. So, we see in basketball a lot of times, some guy is 3,500 and projects for 1 million points, and he's 82% owned. Yeah, oh, sure, he's the chalk, but maybe he should be 96% owned. So, 82% owned can still be under-owned. So, the Mets are going to be the highest owned stack, but are they high owned enough on this slate? I mean, we have 10 games, assuming the Yankee game doesn't play. They project for the most, but there's a big difference between the Mets being as a stack being 30% owned and being 20% owned, or even being 15% owned. I don't know. And do you think the Mets are going to be under owned? They're going to be the most owned, but will they be over owned? Because if they're not going to be over owned, I'm putting them as an A tier. But if you think they're going to be over owned significantly enough, they're a B tier, because I don't know who to put in the A tier otherwise, because the Mets it's seriously, I'm looking at the bat stacks page. It's the Mets, and then it's a gulf. And then you get to the Yankees, who aren't even probably going to play, right? You get to the Rockies, obviously, on the other side of the game. Then you get to the Yankees,
right?
And then you get to the Braves, which we'll talk about. And then we start getting the middle of the pack is like 15 points lower projected. And I'm like, how do I put any of these teams in the A tier if I'm not going to put the Mets in the A tier? So do you think the Mets are going to – how owned do you think they're going to be as a stack?
So what I did, Blender, I looked at the bats ownership projections. I've looked at the bats ownership projections, and I've looked at the RotoGrinders ownership projections. I just want to kind of see how close they were. And I mean, we're only getting gaps of, maybe 1% here, 2% there, which basically says that, hey, all of their big bats, by big bats, I'm talking about expensive. So let me make that clear. I'm talking about expensive. Like
Lindor, Martinez, Alonso, those types.
Yeah. Alonso, Nimmo, the 5K guys, they're all going to be roughly 10% or more. I don't think any of them exceed, at least according to the ownership, I don't think they're going to exceed 20% on any one bat. I think our cap is somewhere between 15 and 17 for any of these one bats. Even Tyrone Taylor, we've got him projected. So now I'm going whole lineup. We've got him projected to be right now around 10% in the RG projections as a 3K 2-bat. I think that's off. I think that one is off, Blender, at 3K. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think the cheap guys, Taylor, maybe even Vientos, and maybe even Bader at the bottom of this lineup, because people understand Bader's a pretty solid hitter. I think they might be Taylor's definitely going to be over-owned. I think the 5K guys are going to be what I consider normal levels for a Coors game in 5K bats. So I don't think they're going to be over-owned, to answer your question, but I think they're good in the A tier. I think Taylor's going to be he's probably going to push 20-25% by the end of this thing.
If he bats second at 3K in Coors against Kyle Freeland, he's going to be that guy that you probably don't want to play as a one-off. Right. Either play him in the Mets stack or don't play him at all. On the other side of the game, we have the Rockies against Luis Severino. Where are we putting the Rockies? Because obviously they get much less ownership. But to be fair, the Rockies have the second. Once you take the Yankees off the slate, the Rockies have the second highest implied team total on the slate at 4.7, 4.8. They're affordable as it is also, point per dollar wise, because of ownership reasons. I mean, obviously, I think the Mets are going to be 3 times more owned than the Rockies today. Are the Rockies an A tier team?
They are for me. Now, Blender, I'm sure you know this. I'm typically someone that just doesn't play Coors because I feel like people they blow it out of proportion, like how much better the hitting environment is actually better, but how often the outcome takes down a tournament is much less than how well the hitting environment is compared to other things. So I want to make that clear, which is why I typically avoid Coors unless like I'm in the situation where I feel like, okay, I have to or it's advantageous. So it is fluid. I like the Rockies more than the Mets because I feel like the Rockies aren't going to get any ownership. And I think they've got just as good of a shot to knock around Severino as the Mets do to knock around Freeland. So I love both of these teams in the A tier.
Okay, then we have some teams. We're going to skip the Yankees. Some teams that project close to the Rockies, nowhere close to the Mets. We got the Braves against Colin Ray. We got the Red Sox against Seth Lugo. And we got the Brewers against Bryce Elder. Where are we putting the Braves, the Red Sox, and the Brewers?
Braves are going into B tier for me. Brewers are going into B tier. Red Sox are going into B tier. Because if you look at the ownership blender, like these teams on any other slate would be soaking up. Honestly, I think the Red Sox go A tier for me today. But like they're not getting any ownership. Like
they're also expensive, but I mean, Will. I mean, to play the Red Sox, I mean, you're paying more than playing the Mets. So, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why the ownership is as low as it is. But if you're playing the Red Sox as a decent stack, I mean, you're playing Tyler Montero in your lineup. I mean, you're not playing even the Lopez Castillo combination. So I'm not sure how much I could put them in the A tier, being that I can't get two really good pitchers. I'm fine with the B tier with the caveat that if you get spending up to be different at bats, I think the Red Sox are a good candidate for that. But I'm not gonna. I'm gonna veto that, moving them up to the A tier.
Well, let me make a small case, and let's see if I can possibly change your mind. The Boston Red Sox feel more expensive than they are because of this Coors slate. So what I'm saying is that we're comparing apples to apples. Clearly, the Mets have the highest team total. But now I'm saying apples to apples.
But Boston has a 4 implied team total. Will there's 4?
No. I understand. I'm now blended. Now we're going like hardcore tournament. Like if Boston goes off here, like you win a tournament. That's
I agree with you. But that doesn't make them easy.
But what I'm saying is, in terms of the salaries, Boston and the Mets are fairly identical here. Like Duran's 5,700, Lindor's 59. Then you've got O'Neill at 53. You've got Nimmo at 5K. You've got Alonso at 5,400. And you've got Devers at 58. And then after that, everybody's pretty much in the low 4K range and 3K range. Like that's what I'm saying in terms of Boston. That's why I'm so high on them today, because they're pretty comparable to the Mets, and I think they've got just as equal a shot to get off here.
2.5 less implied run total. Will?
No. But Blender, you know what I'm saying. I'm saying for tournaments, the salary distribution is close enough to where I can get the Mets, the Red Sox, in the same type of lineup as me wanting to play the Mets. Like if you're, as an example, if you're playing Castillo, and that's why I mentioned this earlier, if you're playing Castillo and Lopez and you play the Mets, you already know a lot of people are doing that. If you play Castillo and Lopez, you play Boston, nobody's doing that. And that's my point behind the tournament piece.
Okay, I'm fine with the B tier, but nobody's doing it. Is not solely alone for an A tier case when you have a 4 implied run total on a 10-game slate. So I'm fine with the paying up to be different type of stuff. Okay, now we start getting teams these are all middle of the pack. I mean, these are teams that legitimately are 12 to 14 points lower projected than the Mets. This is how big the gap is. So we got the Orioles against Chris Bassett. We got the A's against Jonathan Cannon. We got the Dodgers against Christopher Sanchez. And we got the Royals against Brian Bayo. So where are we putting the Orioles, A's, Dodgers, Royals. These are all, I mean, we can even say the A's are not a bad hitting team anymore. The A's are the cheapest team out of this bunch, but the Orioles, the Dodgers, and Royals are good hitting teams. We'll even throw in the Phillies against Clayton Kershaw. Another
I'm
good
so
hitting
glad
team.
you mentioned this. I'm so glad you mentioned this. We'll get to that, Blender. Orioles are going B tier for me, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, Orioles B team against Bassett. Bassett's struggle with lefties this season has been noted, Blender, and it's these are facts. This is the truth now, right? Like, we're not speculating. Lefties have been able to get to him, and he's just going to see a plethora of lefties today, Blender. I think, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's probably going to see 7 lefties today. So this should be a slightly, well, I don't even want to say slightly. This should be a rough outing for him. So Baltimore's going into B tier for me today. When you look at the Blue Jays, I think did you mention the Blue Jays?
No, we're not. We haven't got to the Blue Jays yet. The Orioles, the A's, the Dodgers, the Royals.
Okay, Dodgers are going to be C tier for me. I'm not a big fan of Christopher Sanchez. Don't get me wrong, but I just think because of some of these lineup shifts, they're a really top heavy lineup now, and so in terms of overall hitting, I don't think they're a top tier team, and I'm sure the projections agree there. Which is what we're talking about with them being 12 points below the Mets, if that's what it is, somewhere around there. So they're a C tier team for me. Oakland, I think so, and I know there's probably going to be some debate on this. I still hate the Oakland ballpark. I'm going to put Oakland in the C tier, but they're cheap enough to be a secondary stack. So I totally understand it, but I don't think they're a primary today. And then in terms of the Royals, I think the Royals are C tier for me as well. Although I think, and I mentioned this last night in the morning grind, I do think Bayo is viable, Blender. Like, if you need to get cheap, like if you have to go cheap at 6,500, I think he's viable. And so I'm okay. And as a result of that, I definitely think the Royals in the C tier.
Okay, you wanted to talk about the Phillies against Clayton Kershaw.
Yes,
his last start, he got what, 2 whiffs or something? He got like the swing and strike rate is, I mean, it's small sample size, but I mean, he's not Clayton. He's not 2014 Clayton Kershaw.
Correct.
Anymore.
Correct. And that's just the truth, Blender, right? It's kind of like, once again, in terms of a career, Clayton Kershaw, fantastic career. And I mentioned this last night.
First ballot Hall of Famer, right?
No doubt. But we're judging him on where he is today. And right now, Blender, this version of Clayton Kershaw is a shell of the dominant Clayton Kershaw when we paid $13K for him on DraftKings. Some people may not even remember that. Like, we were paying $13K for Clayton Kershaw, and he was still paying off this.
Right, happily paying. We're going, obviously, we prioritize Kershaw at $13K and then figure out what we do with bats.
Yes.
Because the guy's gonna get 27 fantasy points plus, no problem.
Yeah, every start. It was incredible. And so, but those days are long gone. And just kind of getting back, Blender. I still think, once again, do I think he's going to be a good pitcher as he continues to go? I think he's going to be good, but he's not great anymore. He's very hittable, Blender. If you look at the season, early sample size, I think his K rate's around 14%. Once again, very early, that probably comes up, but I don't think it gets past 25. It may not even get past 21. Kershaw's just not the same player. And so as a result, I think he's very attackable. So I like the Phillies here. Phillies are going in the C tier, but only because, in terms of their pricing, I prefer to play Boston. But the Phillies, I think, are a good stack here if you really think Kershaw is attackable the way I do.
Okay, right underneath this grouping, and remember, we're still now we're getting 14 to 16 points off the Mets.
Yeah.
The Cardinals against Jeffrey Springs, the Mariners against Kiter Montero, the Astros against Tyler Mahle, and the Blue Jays against Grayson Rodriguez. So where are we putting the Cardinals, the Mariners, the Astros, and the Blue Jays?
Okay, Blue Jays for me are going in the D tier. I think Grayson Rodriguez. Now, once again, Blender, he's facing this team back to back, so I don't expect him to have an electric start. But I think there's enough right-handed hitters in this lineup for him to still neutralize their run scoring ability. So while I may not be expecting 8 strikeouts like the last performance, I still think he can neutralize their run scoring ability enough. So Blue Jays are going in the D tier. In terms of the Cardinals, I feel like we're in a similar spot to the Kershaw situation, where Jeffrey Springs is a guy that we know he has some strikeout capability, but I think he's just getting back. I think he's trying to work himself into it. And so the Cardinals, I think, are would have probably been a B tier team, but they're a little bit more expensive than what I want to pay. So I'm going to put them in the C tier. And that's my issue with the Cardinals. They're a little bit more expensive. Like I would have needed Mason Wynn. If Mason Wynn was $3,800 and Pham was $3,800 and Contreras was like $4,500, like now we're getting closer to like putting them in lineups. But I think they're slightly too expensive there. In terms of the Mariners, they fit the bill now, Blender, of a team that, while I understand Montero probably has some possible strikeout upside here, he's a guy that has demonstrated that it may in fact not be there even against this Mariners team. I think the Mariners are a little bit too cheap. Mariners are going in the B tier despite their point differential. For me, Blender, despite the point differential, I think this team is cheap enough. This is the team I can get to if I want to play Gray and Imanaga. And so that's why I value the cheap salary here for them. Let me see. What was the other team? Was
Astros against Tyler Mahle.
Yeah, Astros are going into the C tier for me because, Blender, I'm not sure where Tyler Mahle is in his in terms of his pitching. I don't know how he's going to look tonight, and so I think he could just be attackable first game back. You know, maybe he's not quite there. Mechanics are a little off, so Houston's going in the C tier. Is that everybody?
Yeah, that's everyone in that
Okay.
grouping. Now we're getting into the grouping where these are teams that are 17 to 20 points off the Mets, and they're facing
DNF.
right. These are DNF teams.
Yeah.
Right, most probably. And they're facing the pitchers that are most likely playing, right? So let's well, we got the Rays against Gray, the Rangers against Valdez, the White Sox against Stripling, and the Tigers against Castillo. One of these things is not like the other. Can I put the White Sox on the D tier? Only because you mentioned, like, we're probably not going to play Ross Stripling, and the White Sox are absurdly cheap. So if you wanted to play like 2 9K pitchers and a Met stack, and there's like, I'm playing a 3-man Sox, or I'm playing 5 Sox and 3 Mets or something, like you could do that with the White Sox. But I mean, I'm going to put them in the F tier. The Tampa Bay Rays against Gray.
Yeah.
Tampa Rangers against Valdez. And the Tigers against Castillo. Can you make a case why any of these 3 teams shouldn't be in the F tier?
I think the Rangers for me would be a D tier team because once again, run total is at 4. And Houston's run total is also at 4. But once again, I'm attacking Mahle for a different reason. I just think in terms of the Rangers, projections are okay. But we understand, like, this team has enough power. They hit a couple that they could hit 5 or 6. They could score 5 or 6 runs here. So I think this team is a much better team than anyone we're going to see in the F tier.
Okay. Lastly, the 2 worst projected teams on the slate. Both these stacks are 24 points below the Mets. They are literally half the projection. The projection of the Mets.
In the worst hitting conditions on the slate.
Right, the worst hitting conditions on the slate. The Cubs against Lopez, the Twins against Imanaga. No one's gonna play them, but no one should play them. I mean, like,
right.
I mean, I'm not paying these prices for the Cubs and Twins in a game where the wind is blowing in at 20 miles an hour. And they're facing two good. It's not like, oh, it's just the wind's blowing in and they're facing some gas can. It's like, no, I'm not. I would think that if you told me the wind was nothing, like it was 0 miles an hour, these would be D-tier teams as it was, right? Against Imanaga and Lopez. And now once you 20 miles, it's like, well, they're going to be .0% owned. It's like, remember, these are 5-man. This is a tier list of 5-man stacks. So it's not just like, oh, the Cubs put up, oh, the wind's blowing in and they still scored 5 or 6 runs. It's like, well, that doesn't matter if any of these other teams put up 10. Like, who cares, right? Like, it's like, what we have to look at the ceiling of the stacks, not like like an average result. Well, Lopez gets blown up and you have leverage there. And he gives up 4 earned runs. It's like, that ain't going to win you a slate with five Twins and 5 Cubs in your lineup, right? You need like, how often does this team score 10 runs, 12 runs, that type of stuff?
In these conditions. In these
conditions against these pitchers, it's not worth 1% ownership today.
Right. And let me say this too, Blender. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, hopefully what the listeners and everybody that's heard us, probably talk about fantasy for a long time, hopefully they understand, like, we don't try to be different just to be different. Like, there are reasons why we would do certain things a certain way. And so with the Cubs and the Twins, Blender, like, this is just a rough spot for them, like you said, without the weather. And when you throw in the weather, I'm going to mention this because I think it's important for you to understand. Wind in Wrigley, it's actually really important. Like, when Vegas is coming out with a 6.5 run total, they're trying to tell you something. They're basically trying to say, hey, run opportunities, Blender, not just scoring. Opportunities are going to be limited in this game. And just like when the wind is blowing out, Blender, a routine fly ball could carry an extra, few feet and run into, and become a home run. The same thing rings true for a fly ball with 20 miles per hour blowing in. A ball that may have carried to the track line is now going to be somewhere in center field. Like, it's just that's how powerful the wind effect is in Wrigley. And if you guys want to know a little bit more about that, not to give too much away, Blender, but you can just go check Weather Edge for those of you that have that, and just poke around and look and see, what similar situations have been over the course of several years. And you check Weather Edge, and you will see pretty quickly that run scoring has been significantly impacted in these types of conditions in Wrigley. And so I think that's important to know. That's something that's really cool. Like, look at this, Blender. Home runs down 30%, total runs down 10%, ERA for the pitchers down about 16%. That should tell you all you need to know about, like, where the runs are going to be. Like, it's going to be a pretty low scoring game for sure. At least we anticipate.
And you can get Weather Edge if you're a RotoGrinders premium member. Get Cheese's $1 Million Musings. Get the expert survey. Get the consensus value rankings. Get our Plate IQ research tool. Get SimLabs, our simulations for the DraftKings contests, and our projections, our ownership, everything that are updated on a regular basis. Click on that link in the description. Get $40 off your first month. Before we get out of here, Will, got any good pick 'em on the pick 'em streets? Anything good to pick? I mean, I know it's almost noon, so a lot of the good stuff is gone. But is there anything that may be up on the board that some people could maybe add to their slips on either Prize Picks, Underdog, whatever, Sleeper? I know there's tons and tons of pick'em sites that you play in your state.
Yeah, so I'm going to mention these, and guys, you just have to try to catch it if you can. So I will say this on the pick'em sites, in terms of fantasy points, the bat did not agree with all of these, Blender, but once again, I'm taking some shots here. So at Clayton Kershaw at 24.5 fantasy points, I took less than that projection. Once again, that's me using a little bit of insight saying, hey, he's not quite there yet. Phillies are a pretty good hitting team. Christopher Sanchez at 27.5 fantasy points took less than that projection. Mackenzie Gore, let me mention this. Mackenzie Gore isn't on the slate, but I think something's wrong with Mackenzie Gore-Bender. Like his arm has kind of fallen off a cliff. Strikeouts aren't there, not able to get through innings efficiently. He's always had a walks problem and not being able to get through efficiently. But I think he's either hurt or his arm is really, really tired for going through a full workload. I mean, from spring training through about midseason, I mean, this guy was fantastic. We get past the All-Star break, Blender, and it's like his arm is just falling off of a cliff. So at 30.5 fantasy points, want less than that projection. Chris Bassett at 27.5 fantasy points. I want less than that projection as well. This is a guy that has really struggled with left-handed hitting all season. I expect that to continue tonight. Seth Lugo at 29.5. He's another guy, Blender. As we've gone down through the end of the season, he's struggling with left-handed bats. I think he's somewhere around a 14% K rate over the past month or so, somewhere around there. So I got that one as well. And those totals should still be fairly close, Blender. So I'm going to stick with the fantasy points today because I know the strikeout things have moved or have already had these multipliers that will change the payout. But the fantasy point stuff, I think, should all still be fairly close there. So I'm taking unders on all those. Kershaw, Sanchez, Gore, Bassett, Lugo, less than all those fantasy point projections.
And you get that and more in the Chiefs Prop Shop. Join the Discord, rotogrinders.com/Discord. It's free. It's free. You don't even have to be a member. You don't have to be a premium member. So join it in the Discord. Follow Will on Twitter at Chief Justice 06. We got Grinders Live later today, 5 p.m. Eastern. You'll see the thumbnail on the YouTube channel. And then following Grinders Live is Crunch Time. Get that update if maybe there's a miracle and the Yankee game plays. Maybe there's a miracle. I don't think so. I don't think the Yankee game plays. But always get the latest weather, the weather insights and Roth's updates on Crunch Time Live with him at around 6:15, 6:20 here on YouTube. And then hit that thumbs up button on your way out the door. Give me those thummy thumbs. You know how much I like the thummy thumbs. Hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to always know when I go live, because I'm here for you every Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern, talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props, and pick 'em on RotoGrinders Today.